The moving truck had barely pulled away, its grumbling engine fading into the humid afternoon, when the whispers started. They were not loud, but they were there, a subtle undercurrent beneath the chirping of sparrows and the distant whir of a lawnmower. Curtains twitched in the house next door, and across the street, a man pruning his roses paused to watch the scene unfold. Alicia Johnson, a young black woman with a posture that spoke of discipline, and a smile that hinted at hard-won peace, was blissfully unaware. She stood on the porch of her new home, her home, a sturdy craftsman with a welcoming front door. She'd already painted a cheerful, if slightly daring shade of blue. The scent of pine from the unpacked boxes mixed with the sweet fragrance of magnolia blossoms. After 8 years of military service, moving from base to base, from the dust of Afghanistan to the damp chill of Germany, this quiet suburban street represented a dream finally realized. It was stability. It was roots. She was carefully unpacking a box labeled Kitchen Fragile. Her hands wrapped around her grandmother's ceramic mixing bowl, a precious artifact of life before uniforms and salutes. The weight of it in her hands felt like an anchor. That's when she appeared. A middle-aged woman with a severe blonde bob and a clipboard held like a shield marched across the impeccably manicured lawn, with a sense of territorial ownership that made the hairs on Alicia's arms stand up. The woman's name was Margaret, though the neighbors, in the hushed tones reserved for natural disasters and difficult relatives, simply called her the Karen. As the head of the Homeowners Association, she wielded her authority not as a responsibility, but as a weapon. Margaret came to a halt at the foot of the porch steps, her eyes the color of chilled steel, performing a slow, dismissive inventory of Alicia, the boxes, and the new blue door. She did not smile. "Excuse me," she began, her voice sharp enough to slice through the afternoon calm. "Who are you? Do you even live here?" The question, so blunt and accusatory, landed like a slap. Alicia carefully set the mixing bowl back into box, the ceramic clink sounding unnaturally loud in the tense silence. Years of military training kicked in. She straightened her spine, her expression neutral, her voice calm and polite despite the sudden racing of her heart. "Yes, ma'am," she replied, her tone even. "I'm Alicia Johnson. I just closed on this house last week. I moved here after my final deployment. I was stationed overseas." She offered a small, hopeful smile, extending an olive branch. "I'm really excited to be part of the community." She mentioned her service instinctively, a credential she'd found sometimes smoothed over unexpected rough patches. But Margaret's pinched face showed no recognition, no appreciation. Instead, the woman's lips pursed as if she tasted something sour. Her gaze flickered from Alicia's face to the single, modest car in the driveway, then back again, a silent, damning assessment. "I see," Margaret said, the words dripping with skepticism. She tapped her pen against the clipboard. "Well, Alicia, we have certain standards in this neighborhood. Very specific standards." Her eyes drifted pointedly to the blue door. "Architectural modifications require pre-approval. The bylaws are very clear. We have regulations on lawn maintenance, trash and storage, parking, everything. This isn't the kind of place where just anyone can fit in." Alicia felt a hot flush creep up her neck. The unspoken words hung in the air between them, heavier than any box on the porch. Just anyone. She knew what the woman saw, and it wasn't a veteran or a homeowner. It was an outsider. Margaret didn't wait for a response. She gave one final, contemptuous glance at the scene, her message delivered. With a humorless twist of her lips that was more a grimace than a smile, she scoffed. "We'll see about that." Turning on her heel, she marched back across the lawn, leaving Alicia standing alone on her own porch. The excitement of the morning had evaporated, replaced by a cold, familiar weight. The war was supposed to be behind her, but as she watched Margaret's retreating figure, Alicia realized she had just been thrust onto a new, much more personal front line. The moving truck's departure had not signaled an end to the scrutiny, but rather an intensification. Over the next few days, Alicia felt the weight of a constant, unblinking gaze. It was as if Margaret had a sixth sense for any sign of life emanating from the Johnson household. Every time Alicia left for a grocery run or a morning jog, she would catch a glimpse of the HOA president. A silhouette in a bay window, a figure pretending to check her mailbox, always with that ubiquitous clipboard in hand. The surveillance was petty and relentless. When Alicia's army buddy, Marcus, and his wife stopped by for a quick welcome visit, their car had barely been parked for 20 minutes before Margaret materialized on the sidewalk, her pen scratching across her notepad with theatrical importance. Another day, Alicia's compact SUV was parked a foot too far from the curb after a late-night return. By sunrise, she found Margaret on a public street, phone angled, meticulously documenting the transgression as if cataloging evidence at a crime scene. The photos weren't just of the car. They were wide shots that deliberately include Alicia's house, her front door, her very presence. Alicia tried to cling to the discipline that had served her overseas. Observe, assess, do not react. But each incident was a tiny incision, chipping away at her sense of peace and ownership. This house was supposed to be her sanctuary, but it was rapidly becoming a fortress under siege. That Saturday morning, however, felt like a temporary reprieve. Sunshine poured down, and the air was filled with the innocent, joyous sounds of her two nieces, Maya and Chloe, who were visiting with Alicia's sister. The girls, ages 5 and 7, were on their hands and knees on the warm concrete of the driveway, their small hands clutching colorful sticks of chalk. They were drawing a sprawling, lopsided masterpiece, a rainbow leading to a castle where a princess who looked suspiciously like their aunt stood guard. Alicia and her sister, sipping iced tea on the porch steps, watched with fond smiles. For a beautiful, fleeting moment, the tension of the past week melted away. This was the life she had fought for: family, laughter, a simple Saturday. The moment shattered with the aggressive click of the gate latch. Margaret stormed into the yard, her face a mask of manufactured outrage. She didn't address the adults. Instead, she pointed a trembling finger at the children's artwork. "This is a violation of HOA rules," she barked, her voice cutting to the girls' laughter. Maya froze, her yellow chalk stick hovering mid-arc, her small face clouding with confusion and fear. Alicia stood, her movements slow and deliberate, a stark contrast of Margaret's jerky anger. She positioned herself between Margaret and the children. "They're just kids drawing with chalk," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "It's non-toxic. It'll wash away with the next rain." But Margaret's eyes were glittering with a triumph that had nothing to do with chalk or rules. She wasn't looking at the drawings. She was looking at Alicia, at her sister, at the two little black girls on the driveway. She took a step closer, her voice dropping into a venomous mutter meant to be heard by everyone. "You people never care about the rules," she hissed. "You think you can do whatever you want. This neighborhood is not the place for her." The sentence hung in the air, toxic and unfinished, but its meaning was as clear as the daylight. The tone, the glare, the unspoken words. It was a prejudice Alicia had spent her entire life learning to recognize and navigate. A cold fury, sharper than any she'd felt in a combat zone, began to crystallize within her. Then, before Alicia could formulate a response, Margaret did the unthinkable. She pulled out her smartphone, her thumb jabbing at the screen with dramatic finality. She put the phone to her ear, and in a voice loud enough for the 911 operator in the entire street to hear, she declared, "Yes, police? I'd like to report a disturbance and trespassing. I feel threatened." The world seemed to slow down. Alicia's sister rushed to gather the terrified children. The colorful chalk rainbow was now the backdrop to a scene of escalating injustice. Margaret stood there, phone in hand, a self-righteous smirk playing on her lips, having weaponized emergency services in her campaign of harassment. The line had been crossed, and the quiet suburban street was now a battlefield. The words Margaret spoke into her phone were not just a lie. They were a calculated weapon, designed to transform a family moment into a crisis. "Yes, there's a suspicious person at 1422 Maple Grove Lane. She's trespassing. I think she doesn't live here." The specific, venomous phrasing hung in the air, a poison cloud that chilled a warm Saturday morning. The response was unervingly swift. Within minutes, the idyllic street was pierced by the strobing red and blue lights of two police cruisers, their silent visual scream drawing every eye. The cruisers rolled to a halt at the curb, their doors opening to reveal officers whose cautious, trained expressions immediately assessed the scene. For Alicia's nieces, the colorful chalk fantasy was utterly erased by this terrifying new reality. They clung to Alicia's legs, their small bodies trembling, burying their faces in her jeans. Her sister moved closer, her voice a low, furious tremor in Alicia's ear. "This is ridiculous." She called the cops on a homeowner for having children playing in her own driveway. She called them because you're black. It was not a question, but a grim affirmation of the truth they had both understood from the beginning. Before the officers could fully approach, Margaret launched herself toward them, a study in performative outrage. She pointed a dramatically accusatory finger at Alicia, who stood protectively in front of her family. "That's her. Officer, that's the one. She doesn't belong here. I've been the HOA president for years, and I can tell you she's not supposed to be here." She presented herself as the sole arbiter of truth and belonging, her voice shrill with feigned concern for the neighborhood's integrity. By now, a crowd of neighbors had gathered on their lawns and porches. Their reactions were a mixed tapestry of discomfort and morbid curiosity. Some looked down at their feet, embarrassed by the spectacle. Others watched with wide, uncertain eyes. A few whispered to one another, but no one intervened. All eyes were fixed on Alicia, the uninvited spectacle at the center of the drama. One of the officers, a man with a weary but professional demeanor, gently sidestepped the agitated Margaret and approached Alicia. His partner hung back, observing the crowd and a now smirking Margaret. "Ma'am," the lead officer said, his voice level, "we received a call about a trespassing complaint. Can I ask you for some identification, please?" This was the moment Margaret had undoubtedly been waiting for, the moment she expected Alicia to unravel, to protest angrily, to fulfill the stereotype of the aggressive black woman she had so carefully constructed in her narrative. But Alicia did not panic. The military had drilled into her a profound lesson. In high-stress situations, procedure and composure are your greatest allies. She met the officer's gaze, her own calm and direct. "Of course, officer," she replied, her voice even and respectful. With deliberate, unhurried movements, she reached for the wallet in her back pocket. The air was thick with tension, the only sounds the sniffles of her nieces and the rustle of the trees. She didn't fumble. She didn't rush. She opened the wallet and retrieved not just her driver's license, but a second, crucial form of identification. She held them out, her hand steady. "My driver's license confirms my address," she said, her tone clear and carrying in the quiet street. "And this is my military ID. I am Major Alicia Johnson, and this is my home." In her open wallet, the military ID was unmistakable. It was more than just a piece of plastic. It was a testament to her service, her discipline, and her integrity. It was a credential that, in that moment, fundamentally inverted the power dynamic Margaret had tried so hard to establish. The officer's eyes flickered from the ID to her face, his professional neutrality giving way to a flicker of something else. Recognition, and perhaps a dawning understanding of the true situation unfolding before him. Alicia's movements were deliberate and calm, a study in control amidst the swirling chaos of flashing lights and accusatory glares. She handed the officer her Illinois driver's license first. He took it, his eyes scanning the plastic card before glancing up at the house numbers. "It matches, ma'am," he confirmed, his voice neutral. "This is her address." But Margaret, sensing her narrative crumbling, doubled down. Her shrill voice cut through the air, laced with desperation that was becoming obvious to everyone. "IDs can be faked," she snapped, pointing a trembling finger at Alicia. "She's lying. She's probably using a stolen identity. I'm telling you, she does not belong here." Alicia didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She simply held the officer's gaze, her expression one of weary resolve. "I have another form of identification," she stated, her voice clear and steady. She reached back into her wallet, her fingers closing around a different card, one she carried with profound sense of duty and sacrifice. She slid it out and presented it to the officer. It was her U.S. Military Common Access card. The effect was instantaneous. The officer's posture shifted. The cautious, procedural demeanor melted into one of immediate respect. His eyes widened slightly as he took in the familiar insignia, the photo of Alicia in uniform, the clear print denoting her rank and status. He looked from the card to her face, seeing not a suspicious person, but a service member. "Ma'am," he said, his tone now noticeably softer, filled with a reverence that had been absent moments before. He handed the IDs back with a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Thank you for your service." He then turned fully to face Margaret, his own authority now firmly aligned against her baseless claims. "This woman," he stated, his voice loud enough for the gathered neighbors to hear, "is not only the legal owner of this house, she is also a veteran of the United States Armed Forces. There's absolutely no problem here. You have wasted police resources on a false report." The crowd, which had been a silent, ambiguous entity, now found its voice. A wave of murmured disapproval rippled through them. "She's a veteran?" someone whispered, loud and shocked. "Margaret called the cops on a soldier?" Another neighbor, an older man who had kept to himself, shook his head in disgust and glared openly at the HOA president. The social currency Margaret had hoarded for years was devaluing by the second. For the first time, Margaret's face lost its mask of indignant authority. The blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale and strangely small. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. The weapon of her clipboard and her rules had shattered against the shield of Alicia's service. The authority she had wielded so cruelly had vanished into humid air. Alicia finally spoke, not to the officers, but directly to Margaret. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The quiet, measured tone she used carried further than any shout. Each word a precision strike. "You called the police on me," she began, the weight of the injustice giving her words profound gravity, "because you looked at me and decided I didn't belong. You made a judgment based on nothing but your own prejudice." She paused, letting the accusation settle over the street like a verdict. Her gaze was unwavering. "Well, I fought for this country," she continued, her voice gaining a steely edge, "to make sure I do belong, anywhere I choose to live. This is my home, and you have no power here." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the whisper of the wind and the distant chirping of a bird. It was a silence of collective shame, of realization, and of a community witnessing the undeniable collapse of a tyrant. In that quiet, Alicia Johnson finally, truly, moved in. The flashing lights retreated, leaving behind a stain of silence on the sunny street. The officers had departed with sincere apologies to Alicia for the unnecessary stress, their words a formal repudiation of Margaret's actions. In the void left by the sirens, the neighborhood began to stir, its collective conscience awakened. One by one, neighbors drifted across their lawns, their earlier hesitation replaced by a slow-burning shame. A woman from down the street, whom Alicia had only ever seen watering her petunias, was the first to approach. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice thick with emotion. What she did was unforgivable. Another couple, new parents with a baby monitor clipped to their belt, echoed the sentiment, their faces etched with embarrassment that they had been silent witnesses. "We should have said something sooner," the husband admitted, shaking his head. The story, sharp and damning, spread to the cul-de-sac not as gossip, but as a cautionary tale. The figure of Margaret, once a source of furtive fear, was now transformed into one of open contempt. People no longer whispered about her. They simply turned their backs when she walked her dog. The sharp click of her heels on the pavement met with averted eyes and closed doors. The true reckoning came at the next homeowners association meeting. The turnout was unprecedented. The usual handful of retirees was joined by young families and longtime residents who had finally had enough. When the floor was open for new business, a motion was made, not with anger, but with a firm and collective resolve, to remove Margaret from her position as president. The vote was swift and nearly unanimous. The woman who had once wielded her clipboard like a scepter, who had dictated the shades of beige and the length of grass, now sat in a folding chair at the back of Community Hall. She was utterly ignored, a monument to her own hubris. Her authority evaporated into the sterile air. Meanwhile, a different kind of transformation was taking root at 1422 Maple Grove Lane. Alicia, with the same quiet determination she had shown in the face of bigotry, began to truly build her life. Parents who had once hurried their children past her house now smiled and encouraged them to wave. When her nieces visited, The driveway once again became a canvas for chalk art, now joined by the neighborhood kids. Several neighbors, particularly the older veterans from a different era, made a point to come to her porch, not with apologies, but with simple, heartfelt thanks for her service, a recognition that was about more than patriotism. It was about welcome. Alicia's story became a quiet turning point, a scar on the community's memory that served as a permanent reminder. People reflected on the dangerous slope of assumptions, realizing how quickly a moment of prejudice could spiral into a profound injustice, all because one person chose a corrosive path of hate over the simple bridge of kindness. Alicia herself never defined herself by the conflict. She moved forward with a grace that spoke of profound inner strength. She turned the soil in her front yard and planted a vibrant garden of coneflowers and lavender, a defiant burst of color against the HOA's approved palette. She hosted summer barbecues, the smell of grilled food and the sound of laughter becoming the new soundtrack of her corner of a neighborhood. She showed everyone, without ever saying a word, what true strength and dignity looked like. And Margaret? She never lived down the humiliation. The story of the day she tried to push out a new neighbor became local legend, a stain on her reputation that no amount of perfectly manicured lawn could erase. She had attempted to exile someone for not belonging, only to discover that the woman she targeted was not only braver than she could ever comprehend, but was someone who had already sacrificed the very freedoms of home, of community, of belonging that Margaret had so carelessly taken for granted.